Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and America's gas industry, supplying natural gas across this land of ours, providing gas energy to fuel industry, warm homes, heat water, and cook meals for over 160 million people from coast to coast.
These are the islands that caused a worldwide revolution in scientific thought. This tiny group of volcanic islands, isolated, unimpressive, inhospitable, led man to a whole new idea about the very nature of life on Earth. In the fall of 1835, a 26-year-old English naturalist stepped onto the shores of the Galapagos Islands. His name was Charles Darwin. Hi, I'm George Page for Nature, and the young Darwin was not impressed with his first views of the Galapagos Islands. In his famous journal, The Voyage of the Beagle, he wrote, "Nothing could be less inviting than the first appearance of the islands." But as he came into contact with their extraordinary wildlife, he began to make observations which eventually would inspire one of the most profound revolutions in human thought, the theory of evolution. He was struck by the strangeness of the island's antediluvian beasts, as he called them, and found their peculiar tameness so charming that he couldn't resist riding on the backs of giant tortoises and pulling the tails of the iguanas. After his return to England, Darwin slowly began to realize that each island in the isolated archipelago was home to closely related but markedly different varieties of wildlife. Somehow they had been modified to take advantage of the Galapagos' varied habitats. 24 years later, he finally published his findings in this book, On the Origin of Species, and the world has never been the same since. Now, we follow Darwin to Galapagos as we begin the first of 3 programs about the natural history and the bizarre creatures of these remarkable islands. The islands have been described as a cinder pile, 600 miles out in the Pacific Ocean. The Galapagos consist entirely of volcanic lava spewed out from the ocean bed. Over the last 2 million years, some of the lava has broken down into soil, but in places, it looks as though it flowed only yesterday. Much of the vegetation that has colonized the islands is as weird as the landscape. This Brachycereus cactus is the first plant to grow in a recently formed lava flow. The lowland areas are completely arid. This is where the opuntia grows freely, a prickly pear species which, like so many of the other plants, grows only in the Galapagos. Then there's the Jasminocereus cactus. There are greener areas, but you must climb to reach them. On some of the largest islands, volcanoes rise to between 3,000 and 6,000 feet. Around the crater condensing steam from fumaroles and the moisture from low clouds produce mosses, ferns, and vegetation of tropical lushness. Much of the shoreline is uncompromisingly harsh, the lava constantly pounded by the Pacific swell. The unique quality of the landscape, the flora, and the fauna raises many fascinating questions. How did the ancestors of the present Galapagos creatures get to these remote islands in the first place? When did they arrive? How did the islands themselves appear so recently in geological time? Fortunately, that part of the puzzle is the easiest to solve. The Galapagos belong to Ecuador and are situated on the equator. Two geological features have produced the Galapagos. First, they are close to the junction of three of the Earth's moving plates, the Cocos, Pacific, and Nazca plates. Second, they lie over a volcanic hotspot where the molten rock pierces the plates. The Nazca plate on which the islands sit is moving eastward at about 3 inches per year. The active volcanic islands, such as Isabella and Fernandina, are still over the hotspot. Those to the east have already moved away. They are, therefore, older and colder. About 20 million years from now, the Galapagos Islands will have moved with the Nazca plate until they finally disappear beneath the waves. But by then, it's possible that the hotspot will have produced other islands to replace them. This is what the volcanic process looks like when it happens on the seabed. The emission of lava has been going on for more than 10 million years. Gradually, the underwater lava built up a vast platform with large fissures through which it flowed. The weird pillar formations are typical of lava floods on the ocean floor. They're caused by columns of rapidly cooling molten rock. Eventually, the plateau increased in extent and height until about 5 million years ago, some volcanoes broke through the surface. Sometimes, as in the case of the largest island, Isabella, several volcanoes emerged and eventually joined up to form one big island. The process is continuing. The Galapagos are one of the most active volcanic ocean areas on Earth. There are 13 main islands, 4 of them sparsely inhabited, and over 40 rocks and islets in the archipelago. Isabella is 45 miles long and in parts 24 miles wide. It has 5 still active large volcanoes, the tallest rising to almost 6,000 feet. Most of the islands are less than 2 million years old, some less than 1 million. Isabella is one of the younger ones. To the west of it, separated by a narrow strait called the Bolivar Channel, lies Fernandina, with one highly active volcano. Near the shore are some brackish lagoons and mangrove thickets. Inland, much of Fernandina is composed of brittle lava, practically impossible to walk on. Santa Cruz is an older island. Its volcanic days are over. The highlands in the background are a reminder of the past. The second largest island, it's also headquarters of the Galapagos National Park and the Darwin Research Station. Espanola, the most southerly island, was never a volcano. It's a flat lump of lava about 4 miles long, thrust up from the seabed. This is where 20,000 pairs of waved albatrosses nest in 2 colonies. It's one of the earliest islands, probably about 4 million years old. Floriana is an old island too. It was the scene of much volcanic activity in the past and has more than 50 small cones, the largest rising to only 2,000 feet. Islets and rocks are a common feature of the Galapagos. This is Daphne Major, with a crater that's a great attraction to nesting seabirds, especially blue-footed boobies. Different as they are in shape and size, all the islands share a common volcanic origin. All are relatively young, between 4 and 1 million years old. And all the Galapagos Islands, great and small, are home to the most fascinating animal population on Earth. Heading the cast, if only by virtue of sheer weight and size, are the giant tortoises, Galapagos in Spanish, after which the islands take their name. The males can weigh up to 600 pounds. It's thought that they can live for up to 200 years, though no one has yet been able to confirm this in the wild. They have few natural predators, but these harmless vegetarians have suffered heavily at the hands of man and have been wiped out completely on some of the islands. Most of the surviving tortoises live in the moist volcanic uplands because of the plentiful vegetation. Next are the 2 great lizards of the Galapagos. The land iguanas are usually found in the dry areas. But once a year, the largest concentration of all occurs on the crater rim of the great active volcano on the island of Fernandina. The land iguanas come here to nest each year. There's never been a land bridge connecting the islands to South or Central America, so only a few mammals, 2 bats, and some rat species have ever made the journey. Reptiles apparently are better adapted to ocean travel. To look at the marine iguana, you wouldn't think it had evolved from the same ancestor as the land iguana. This one is in breeding colors. It's the only marine lizard in the world, feeding on algae on the lava rocks and below the surface. Of the seabirds, half are native species or subspecies. One of those unique to the islands is the Galapagos flightless cormorant. The swallowtail gull, another unique species, is the only nocturnal gull in the world. It's believed it adapted to feeding at night in order to escape the food-stealing attentions of the frigate birds. The large eye is typical of a nocturnal creature. The swallowtail gull is so unlike all other gulls that it's placed in a genus of its own. The other gull species found only in the Galapagos is the lava gull, although it does have a close relative on the mainland, the laughing gull. The gray lava coloring enables it to merge with its background. The Galapagos hawk has obvious buzzard hawk ancestors on the mainland, but it too is a separate Galapagos species. It's a fierce and successful predator, preying on small birds, lava lizards, and young iguanas. Along with the tortoises, iguanas, and his famous finches, the Galapagos mockingbirds gave Charles Darwin pointers toward his theories on evolution. Quite different from mainland mockingbirds, they have evolved into 4 separate species. They're opportunistic feeders and scavengers and can be fiercely predatory. The victims here are newly hatched turtles. Of the seabirds that chose the islands as their only breeding ground, the waved albatross is the most impressive. As if the Galapagos bird list wasn't strange enough, it includes a penguin. The Galapagos penguin is one of the smallest and certainly the most northerly of all penguin species. It's restricted to only the coldest waters of the islands. Like the penguin, fur seals are normally found in cold, even sub-Antarctic seas. They too are sufficiently different from their nearest relatives to be given the status of a separate species. The sea lions lack the dense undercoat of the fur seals. They differ from their sea lion ancestors in California mainly in size. They're slightly smaller and are a Galapagos subspecies. The 13 species of finches, often called Darwin's finches, form the evolutionary showpiece of the archipelago. Small, rather uninteresting-looking birds, they have descended from one common mainland ancestor. The most amazing of all is the woodpecker finch, which uses a stick or cactus spine to pry insects out of dead trees, and thus becomes one of nature's few tool-using animals. Once the islands had appeared, how did the ancestors of the present unique Galapagos species reach them? Well, there's no doubt that the sea lions came south from California. The fur seals and penguins came from the opposite direction, led by the cold Peru current. The route taken by tortoises, iguanas, and finches is less certain. Some experts name South America as their starting point. But today, many scientists think that Central America in the region of Panama is more likely. The finches were probably blown here by storms. Tortoises and iguanas may either have floated or arrived on natural rafts. The riverside forests of Panama were probably the original home of the ancestors of the Galapagos reptiles. No one can be quite certain, but this is now thought to be the creature from which the two very different species of Galapagos iguanas evolved. It's the green iguana, common in much of Central and South America. The green iguana is very much at home in water. It has to be, living in riverine forests often inundated by floodwaters. It's no rare event for these big lizards to fall into the water accidentally. They're excellent swimmers and sometimes choose this way to get around. When you watch the big lizard swimming, the resemblance to the marine iguana is striking. Hind legs are held close to the side, and propulsion comes from sinuous movements of tail and body. Head and crest are quite similar to the profile of the Galapagos land iguana. No one seriously suggests that the green iguana swam 1,000 ocean miles to make a landfall on the Galapagos. But there was a possible form of transport available to it. The iguana often climbs on rafts of floating vegetation. In flood seasons, very large rafts are a common sight on the big rivers of Central and South America, and often they make their way out to sea. So it's possible that iguanas, lizards, and snakes hitched a ride to the Galapagos in this way. The rafting theory also holds for the probable mainland ancestor of the giant tortoises. Obviously, this tortoise wouldn't have made it all the way to the islands, but no doubt logs carried some smaller reptiles there. The ancestral tortoise, Geochelone, is widely distributed on the mainland. It's a small animal by comparison with the Galapagos giants. But tortoises lacking competition on isolated oceanic islands are known to evolve into giant forms. The same thing has happened to the tortoises on the island of Aldabra, far out in the Indian Ocean. The ancestor of the Galapagos finches probably looked like this little bird, the blue-black grassquit. Ancestral grassquits presumably got blown to the islands in storms. Cocos Island, lying midway between the Galapagos and Central America, may have been a way station for them. There's a related species of finch found there today. It's been estimated that no matter how many rafts of vegetation sank, and most probably did, one successful crossing by a pregnant female iguana or tortoise every 100,000 years would have been sufficient to give the islands their present populations. But the odds against the immigrants were longer than that. For many thousands of years, there would have been very little vegetation on the barren islands, and therefore no food for the new arrivals. But eventually, plants colonize the islands. Many seeds can survive long immersion in salt water and arrived by sea. A bursera seed has taken root. Lichens were almost certainly the first plants to establish themselves, but they wouldn't have provided any food. Nor would a Brachycereus cactus, a fairly recent arrival itself. Some seeds and spores were wind-borne. Grass seeds are often spread by birds. Gradually, the vegetation built up in this inhospitable landscape. This dark-rumped petrel gives a vivid demonstration of how some seeds certainly made the journey to the islands. At first sight, its plumage appears to be oiled. In fact, its feathers are weighed down with sticky seeds. They happen to be the seeds of a tree already present in the islands, but they could just as easily have been carried from anywhere within such a seabird's wide range. The flora of the islands is as peculiar and diversified as its animal life. Most of the plants possess small and inconspicuous flowers, probably because there are very few insects and therefore little need to evolve showy blossoms to attract pollinators. There is only one species of solitary bee, the Galapagos carpenter bee. It's thought to be a fairly recent immigrant. Since carpenters nest in wood, it's likely to have drifted over inside a log. Nevertheless, it's been in the Galapagos long enough to have evolved into a native or endemic species. That's the male. He's a bright yellow. The female is black. Yellow flowers seem to attract the carpenter bees most. Among the few other pollinating insects are 8 species of butterflies, 1 endemic, and many species of moths. The difficulties facing those first animal colonists can hardly be exaggerated. First, a sea crossing of up to 1,000 miles. Then a landfall on a coast that is for the most part totally hostile to seaborne invasion. Third, the likelihood that if you do get ashore, there is no food waiting for you. And finally, the distinct possibility that you will never find a mate. Imagine that you are a mainland tortoise or a green iguana that has survived a month at sea. You've been washed ashore in the surf and now have to scale an obstacle like this. Yet against all these odds, enough made it to become the unique Galapagos species we know today. We'll never know how many rafts of vegetation carrying green iguanas from the mainland sank crossing 1,000 miles of sea to the Galapagos. But the descendants of those first green iguanas which made it followed 2 divergent paths. One led to the sea and eventually to a new species, the marine iguana. It's probable that in their search for food, some of the new arrivals exploited the green iguana's already considerable aquatic talents. On the rocks and in the tidal pools was a plentiful supply of food in the form of marine algae. Over many thousands of years, by the process of natural selection which Darwin described, some of the green iguanas adapted to a watery environment. A blunt snout that allowed the iguana to crop seaweed close to the rocks was favored. Traits that allowed it to stay submerged for longer periods in order to feed also had a natural selection advantage. One adaptation for this was a slower metabolism, which conserves oxygen. Adult marine iguanas have been known to stay submerged for 30 minutes and can feed at depths of 45 feet. Exceptionally strong claws and forelegs, which help them cope with surf, were also favored by natural selection. Marine iguanas seem to prefer shorelines with powerful wave action. This is where the seaweeds on which they feed grow best. Another adaptation to marine life is the flattened tail, which gives propulsion when swimming. The normally dark skin helps the cold-blooded reptiles absorb heat after feeding in the sea. The male iguana, with its pronounced crest, is quite an intimidating creature. The bony plates on top of the head play their part in mating fights. The scientific name for the species is Amblyrhynchus, meaning blunt-nosed. The marine iguana allows the finches to clean parasites from its skin. A lava lizard pulls dead skin from an iguana's tail. It's another Galapagos species that must have rafted here in the remote past. In the breeding season, both sexes take on color, though the degree to which they do so varies between islands. There are 7 subspecies of marine iguanas. The most highly colored of all come from the island of Hispaniola. Establishment of a breeding territory is very important. It's won by an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation between rival males, and sometimes last 4 or 5 hours. These less colorful males come from the island of Fernandina. Territories can be anything from 1 to 10 square yards, but they may be just a single block of lava. The best sites attract the most females. The less desirable sites are lower down near the water. In winning and holding his territory, a male may lose a quarter of his body weight over a 6-week period. Actual mating with various females takes about 3 weeks. The females have less pronounced crests and are usually smaller. They excavate the nest and lay from 1 to 3 eggs 5 weeks after mating. Then they stay on guard at the nest site for up to 10 days. This nest hole was probably a trial excavation, or one in which she wasn't yet ready to lay her eggs. That doesn't stop the mockingbirds from seeing if there are any eggs to steal. That failing, they search for insects. Young iguanas have several enemies. One of the most effective is the Galapagos hawk, a powerful raptor well suited to seizing ground prey. The small, non-poisonous Galapagos snake, Dromicus, one more reptile that survived the voyage from the mainland and became a Galapagos species. It's partial to lava lizards and very small iguanas. Today, there are between 200,000 and 300,000 marine iguanas in the Galapagos. Their population is in balance with natural predation. From time to time, however, a failure of ocean currents affects the growth of the seaweeds on which they feed. Wide-scale starvation follows. In 1982, corpses could be seen on every shore after the drastic upset of ocean temperatures caused by the warm water mass called El Niño. But such disasters must have happened many times since the first ancestral iguana landed. No doubt they will happen again. Only 2 years after El Niño, the marine iguana population was fast recovering. The same green iguana from the mainland is thought to be the ancestor of the Galapagos land iguana. In evolutionary terms, the land iguana hasn't changed as much from its mainland ancestor as its marine cousin. But there were a number of adaptations to the Galapagos environment. There's practically no fresh water in the islands, so its jaw had to become powerful enough to break off and crush moisture-containing vegetation like cactus pads and fruit. It lacks the long claws of the marine iguana, but it doesn't have to cling to rocks in the heavy surf. Their claws do have to be powerful and blunt for digging their burrows in the soil. This lava lizard catching flies is in no danger. Land iguanas are vegetarians, and the lizard is doing it a favor. The iguana's yellow color is in complete contrast to its marine cousin. But then the land iguana's problem is to lose heat, not gain it. In some ways, the adaptations which the ancestors of the land iguana made were as foreign to it as those of the marine species. The green iguana of the mainland had lived largely in lush, wet forests. In the Galapagos, it was faced with an almost completely dry landscape. But many lizard species are at home in semi-desert conditions, and the land iguana is no exception. On the 6 islands where it's still found, it prefers the dry zones with low, sparse scrub. Because of the moisture stored in its fleshy pads, cactus is a favorite food. The big lizards will even wait under the opuntia trees for ripe fruits to drop. Very few animals will eat opuntia. It's too well armed with spines. The land iguana has developed techniques for dealing with the situation, either by biting between the main groups of spines or by rolling the fallen fruits on the ground to flatten or knock off the spines. Finches play an important part in the land iguana's life. The marine iguana is quite happy to let finches clean the parasites off its skin, but it doesn't ask for help. The land iguana, on the other hand, tells the birds that it needs them by raising itself on all 4 legs. And that way, the finch can do a thorough job. Though the land iguanas are found mainly in the dry lowlands, there is one notable exception, on the island of Fernandina. The rising sun unveils the unearthly landscape on the crater's rim of Fernandina's great active volcano. The volcanic highlands are the one place where moisture can be found all year round. But it's a difficult and arduous journey to those craters, at first over crumbly lava, then up through arid scrub until the lush green is reached. Many of the land iguanas of Fernandina make this journey every nesting season. It's the soft, warm layers of volcanic dust around and inside the crater that attracts them. The crater rim provides some strange contrasts. Close to the ash fields grows rich green vegetation, watered by condensation from the clouds that often envelop the top of the volcano. Some of the shrubs bear fruits and flowers, which the iguanas eat during the nesting period. The females return to the same breeding areas each year. They inspect the territories on arrival, and it's they, rather than the males, who choose the mate. At peak nesting time in July, the volcanic dust is crisscrossed with their trails. The female excavates the nest hole and then lays between 7 and 23 eggs. Then she'll mount guard for several days. Giocellone, the probable mainland ancestor of the giant Galapagos tortoises, could easily have crossed 1,000 miles of Pacific Ocean on a raft of vegetation. It weighs only about 10 pounds. Even without a raft, it could survive floating in salt water for up to a month. There are 14 subspecies of Galapagos giant tortoises. On the largest island, Isabella, the tortoises even differ slightly from region to region. The tortoises on each of the 5 volcanoes are separate subspecies. Separated by hostile terrain, they don't interbreed. These are Santa Cruz tortoises enjoying a mud wallow in the humid uplands at the center of the island. It was pointed out to Darwin by the governor of the Galapagos that tortoises on different islands had different shaped carapaces or shells. Those on Santa Cruz are smooth, dome-shaped, and low at the front, adaptations that enable them to move more easily through dense vegetation. The shell of an Espanola tortoise is high in front. This adaptation allows its owner to reach up for the sparse, scrubby vegetation that Espanola offers. It's a low, dry island with no volcanic uplands. The giant tortoises enjoy a regular mud wallow. You might think that a tortoise wouldn't be worried by mosquitoes, but the soft underparts are vulnerable to their bites. A good coating of mud offers some protection. Once there were hundreds of thousands of tortoises in the Galapagos. Buccaneers, sealers, and whalers decimated them for food. In 1831 alone, 68 ships took 13,000 tortoises aboard. Sadly, it was often the smaller and easier to load females the sailors caught and ate. The estimated total population today is between 12 and 15,000 animals, split between 6 islands. On Santa Fe and Floriana, they've been extinct for over a century. As recently as 1980, the remains of 27 tortoises were found on Wolf Volcano on the island of Isabella, slaughtered, it's thought, by fishermen. Their main enemies, however, are pigs, dogs, cats, and rats, all animals introduced by man that escaped into the wild. The story of the tortoises on Pinta Island is an especially sad one. There's only one survivor, a male called Lonesome George. He's safe at the Darwin Station on Santa Cruz, but he has no female of his own subspecies to mate with. During the breeding season, which varies among the subspecies, the tortoises gather in the moist uplands to breed. At these times, the highlands resound to the roars of mating males and the clash of giant shells. Giant tortoises take a long time to mature. It's believed they're 30 or 40 years old before they reach breeding age. After mating, most of the females make the long, slow journey down to the arid lowlands to dig their nests and lay an average of 10 eggs in each. Scientists still argue about the ancestor of the 13 species of Galapagos finches. But this bird, Volatinia jacarina, the blue-black grassquit, is a firm favorite. This is one of its descendants, the cactus finch. The Galapagos finches are one of nature's most striking examples of what's called adaptive radiation. This is when one original species adapts to a variety of local feeding and living conditions in isolated areas. Over many generations, its physical shape and behavior are altered by natural selection and chance. With the Galapagos finches, the differences can be seen mainly in the bill shapes. Compare the heavy probing and seed-cracking bill of the medium ground finch with the delicate bill of the tree finch. In each case, the bill reflects the bird's different style of feeding. Darwin noted this, and it became a key element in his theories on evolution. The warbler finch, the smallest of all, has the typical bill of a bird that lives by catching insects. The success of the finches is largely because they have exploited a wide variety of food sources. On Wolf Island, the sharp-billed ground finches have discovered that if they peck at the base of the masked booby's flight feathers, they draw blood, which provides both food and drink. So far, this habit has only spread to one nearby island. Wolf is one of the most isolated of the group. Perhaps the habit arose when the finches were cleaning parasites from the booby's wings and drew blood accidentally. There are no woodpeckers in the Galapagos, but there are a great many rotten trees whose trunks contain insects. The woodpecker finch and the closely related mangrove finch have found a way of exploiting this rich food supply. The habit was first observed in the woodpecker finch. By no means have all woodpecker finches mastered this trick, so it seems the ability is probably learned rather than inherited. A woodpecker finch who has mastered the technique starts by breaking off a probe. Woodpecker finches live in both the arid and moist zones. In dry areas, the chosen tool is often a cactus spine. Here, it's a green twig. The bird usually begins by listening, just as a woodpecker does, to find out if there's an insect at home. The beak is surprisingly powerful, so the bird has no problem breaking off twigs. Sometimes the finch will modify a twig to its liking by snapping off a side shoot, and they're adept at holding a twig down with one foot while they size up the situation. Where a real woodpecker would use its sticky tongue to extract the grub from the tree, the finch maneuvers it with the stick until it's within range of its beak. Incidentally, Darwin never witnessed this most exciting piece of finch behavior. This time it drops the stick. Occasionally it keeps it for future use. These two finches have detected a lively grub inside a dead tree. The dominant bird takes possession and listens at all the available holes. The grub is quite visible to the finch, but its beak is too short to reach it. So the next step is to select a twig. Not long enough. Back to look for a more suitable tool. A cutaway section of the tree shows the finch in action with a slightly longer twig. But this won't do the job either. The grub is too fat and the entrance to the hole too narrow. Perhaps purely by chance, or maybe profiting from past experience, the finch selects a third twig that is slightly curved and therefore better for getting a grip on the prey. Perseverance finally pays off. Finches find their food in many ways. The small ground finch is foraging for ticks on the leathery skin of the marine iguanas. In this one scene is encapsulated some of the wonders of the islands of the Galapagos. Here are two creatures, a bird and a reptile, that have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to become new species. In doing so, they have adapted successfully to one of the harshest environments on the face of the earth. Next time, we look at the abundance of marine life that thrives in the surprisingly chilly seas surrounding the Galapagos Islands in our film, Cold on the Equator. I'm George Page for Nature.
Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and America's gas industry, developing new sources of gas energy and ways to use gas more efficiently for more than 160 million people across America.